Are you okay?
I'm okay.
I'm ready to cry.
You know I can't get out of my head.
I know. Listen.
It just doesn't stop.
Jazz Jennings was once a beacon, the shining face of a new era in transgender visibility. From viral clips to her reality TV show, she represented courage, progress, and affirmation. Yet, beneath the relentless spotlight, a profound and painful reality unfolded. What becomes of a child who transforms into a cultural movement before having the quiet chance to simply become a person? This is the complex account of what the world witnessed and the deeper truths it overlooked. The story of America's youngest transition began like countless other childhood narratives, with a child articulating an unmistakable truth. Born in South Florida in 2000, Jazz was assigned male at birth. But by the tender age of 2, she began asserting her identity. "I'm not a boy," she insisted. "I'm a girl. That's all I consider myself as." Initially, her parents, Greg and Jeanette, hoped it was a passing phase, but the conviction only intensified. Facing Jazz's inconsolable tears over male clothing and pronouns, her parents made a monumental, unprecedented decision: to affirm their child's stated identity. By the age of 5, her social transition was complete. She lived fully as Jazz, a girl, with long hair and preferred clothing. However, this was never destined to remain a private family choice. It was soon to become a global phenomenon. In 2007, Jazz appeared on ABC's 20/20 with Barbara Walters, instantly becoming one of the world's most visible transgender individuals. The segment was truly groundbreaking. A stunned and divided nation watched as a cheerful 6-year-old explained her identity with remarkable clarity. Some praised the Jennings family for their compassion and open-mindedness. Others quickly accused them of rushing their child into a permanent label too soon. That single television appearance transformed Jazz's bright eyes into a cultural firestorm. She was no longer just a child. She became a lightning rod in a rapidly escalating global debate on gender, childhood, and medicine. Behind the televised narrative, something far more complicated was brewing. Jazz's story wasn't merely about personal authenticity. It was about control, public narrative, and the immense weight of representation. Jazz's mother, Jeanette Jennings, emerged as a powerful central figure. She was intensely protective, profoundly involved, and fiercely determined to forge a public path, not just for Jazz, but for all trans children. Jeanette became the de facto spokesperson for trans youth parenting, managing interviews, arranging major appearances, and later overseeing the TLC reality series I Am Jazz, which chronicled her daughter's adolescence. The pressing question was this pure support or careful orchestration? From that pivotal moment onward, Jazz's private life became indistinguishable from a media machine. Reality TV cameras followed her everywhere, to school, to the therapist's office, to doctor's appointments, and even into her moments of personal reflection. She published a children's book, embarked on speaking tours, and was celebrated as a role model to thousands. Yet, signs of tension and emotional strain were quietly visible beneath the surface, growing heavier year after year. Jazz wasn't just living her truth. She was performing it on cue for millions. As Jazz neared puberty, her family made another bold and highly controversial decision. At age 11, under medical supervision, Jazz started taking puberty blockers. These pharmaceuticals are designed to suppress the natural onset of puberty, thereby preventing the development of male secondary sex characteristics like a deeper voice, facial hair, and genital growth. Her family and physicians framed it as a medical necessity, a way to avoid the trauma of a physical development that conflicted with her core identity. To many in the activist and medical communities, this represented a progressive, affirming stride. But others raised fundamental questions that resonate even louder today. Was Jazz truly old enough to consent to such an irreversible choice? Could a child fully grasp the long-term ramifications of halting a natural developmental process? The blockers were later followed by cross-sex hormones, specifically estrogen, to feminize her body. By age 14, her voice remained unchanged, her frame slight, and her overall physical development resembled that of a cisgender girl. On the outside, she projected a feeling of confidence and contentment, but internally, deep-seated doubts began to surface. Privately, Jazz started recording raw, unedited video journals. In one particularly unsettling moment later aired on I Am Jazz, she confessed, "I feel like I'm living a lie. I don't feel like me." This admission was a major alarm bell for many. For years, Jazz had been presented as the perfect trans youth success story. Healthy, happy, and thriving. Now, she was sitting alone, visibly confused, and intensely questioning herself. The growing sense of unease transcended mere emotion. It became existential. Psychologists have long debated the impact of blocking puberty, not just physically, but on identity formation, emotional regulation, and cognitive growth. By bypassing this natural process, had Jazz been deprived of something intangible and vital? Critics theorized that by freezing Jazz's development, the adults in her life had simultaneously frozen her capacity to question or change her mind. She had never experienced what it felt like to explore her identity privately, to mature naturally alongside her peers. Every single step of her self-discovery had been publicly documented, curated, and applauded. As puberty blockers became a political lightning rod, Jazz's experience was solidified as a cultural case study. To proponents, her life validated early medical intervention. To opponents, it stood as a sober, painful, cautionary tale. And for Jazz herself, the profound burden of expectation of always being the right kind of trans person, always advocating, always smiling, was slowly, painfully becoming unbearable. Her tearful diary entries were not simply pleas for help, they were stark, public warning signs. This was not liberation. It was a life increasingly disconnected from the self. By the time Jazz Jennings turned 17, her journey had been extensively hailed as a gold standard case study in early gender transition, lauded in academic forums, medical seminars, and advocacy circles. Yet, beneath the stream of accolades, a complicated and unanticipated medical reality was taking shape. In 2018, Jazz underwent gender confirmation surgery, a procedure intended to construct a neo-vagina. It was broadly celebrated as a crucial milestone, not only for her personal journey, but for the entire transgender youth movement. She was one of the youngest individuals in the U.S. to receive this irreversible operation. However, the tone of celebration quickly dissipated. On I Am Jazz, her doctors spoke with surprising candor. Because Jazz had been on puberty blockers from such a young age, she had not developed sufficient penile tissue needed to construct the vaginal canal, an anatomical consequence directly linked to the medical path her transition had followed. Surgeons were forced to improvise, using skin grafts from her stomach to compensate for the lack of material. It was a risky, delicate endeavor. Complications arose within days. Jazz developed intense pain, profound inflammation, and significant healing issues. Far from being a one-time event, the initial surgery marked the beginning of a grueling medical saga. She required multiple follow-up surgeries to address structural infections and persistent problems. Each new procedure compounded the massive physical and emotional toll. "I've had a lot of surgeries," Jazz stated in a later interview, "and I've had a lot of complications." But it was the quiet, unscripted moments, the confessionals, and offstage scenes that exposed the deeper damage. Jazz, once characterized by infectious optimism, began to visibly fracture under the weight of her experience. She spoke openly of feeling numb, disassociated, and unlike herself. "I feel kind of broken," she tearfully admitted. That single statement resonated far beyond the TV screen. It forced supporters and critics to acknowledge a difficult truth: that gender-affirming surgery, while crucial and life-saving for some, carries profound, unique risks, particularly when pursued at such a young age, under the intense glare of cameras and with limited long-term research to guide the process. What was intended as the symbolic culmination of her affirmation became the beginning of a darker, more exhausting chapter. Physically scarred and emotionally depleted, grappling with the reality of a body rebuilt under tremendous pressure, Jazz was no longer a simple pioneer. She was now a patient in recovery not only from surgery, but from the immense expectations of a world that had made her its poster child. Following her surgery, Jazz Jennings began a slow, then total withdrawal from the spotlight. Her social media updates slowed. Her public appearances dwindled dramatically. When she finally re-emerged, she was notably different: quieter, heavier, and more guarded. The bright-eyed child who had captivated millions had descended into a private, debilitating battle with mental illness. By her early 20s, Jazz publicly revealed she had gained over 100 pounds. What had begun as post-surgical healing morphed into episodes of binge eating, consuming entire pizzas, thousands of calories, or boxes of donuts in a single sitting. The significant weight gain was both an undeniable signal and a symptom of deeper distress. "I'm spiraling," she confessed on the show. "Food is my coping mechanism." The physical changes were tragically mirrored by emotional turmoil. Anxiety and clinical depression crept in. Simple tasks, like brushing her teeth or attending therapy sessions, felt completely overwhelming. Despite the unwavering support from her parents, particularly her mother, Jeanette, Jazz appeared irretrievably lost. In one harrowing scene on I Am Jazz, Jeanette confronted her daughter during a moment of utter despair. "You're just saying stuff and it doesn't make sense. I just want you to love yourself. Why is that so hard?" Jazz remained silent, staring ahead blankly. The audience witnessed a desperate mother fighting to pull her daughter back from the brink, and a daughter unsure if she could even be reached. The raw emotional intensity of the scene was a jarring contrast to the show's early episodes, where Jazz had seemed endlessly resilient and wise beyond her years. Then came the academic detour. Jazz had been accepted to Harvard University, a remarkable achievement for any student, especially one who navigated life under such microscopic scrutiny. But instead of immediately heading to Cambridge, Jazz announced she was delaying her enrollment. Her reason was heartbreakingly simple: "I need time to heal." The decision shocked her fanbase. For years, Jazz had symbolized unbridled potential and progress, a living, breathing testament to thriving as a trans youth. Now, she was deliberately stepping back, openly admitting she was not okay. In doing so, she irrevocably shattered the illusion that her transition had been easy, complete, or without cost. This was no longer the story of a barrier-breaking pioneer. It was the story of a young woman consumed by depression, isolated by relentless fame, and desperately fighting to reclaim control of a life that had never truly been her own to shape. As years passed, and Jazz Jennings' once vibrant smile dulled under layers of emotional fatigue, the question that had been largely forbidden during her rise began to echo with undeniable volume. Was it all too much? Too soon? Even staunch supporters of early gender affirmation found themselves pausing for a painful reflection. Jazz's personal narrative, which had served to inspire school guidelines, medical policies, and TED Talks, now revealed troubling, undeniable cracks beneath its polished surface. Could a child at 5, or even 11, genuinely grasp the lifelong medical and psychological consequences of a transition that permanently altered the mind and body? This uncomfortable line of questioning became utterly impossible to ignore, especially after a provocative 2023 article in Spiked Online titled "The Tragedy of Jazz Jennings." The piece was unsparing in its critique. It accused the adults in Jazz's life, the medical professionals, her parents, and the media figures of outsourcing her genuine well-being to an all-consuming social cause. It argued that Jazz had been forced to become a symbol first and a person second, trapped inside a well-meaning but relentlessly affirming narrative that permitted no room for ambiguity, hesitation, or private exploration. Critics asked whether Jazz had been effectively robbed of natural psychological development, the intimacy of her own evolving emotions, and perhaps most tragically, the right to simply say, "I'm not sure." On her reality show, she articulated unsettling truths, often overshadowed by cheerful soundtracks or upbeat editing. In one particularly jarring scene, Jazz confessed, "I don't experience sexual attraction to anyone. I don't know if I ever will." Her expression was blank, her voice monotone. In that single moment, the confident image of a thriving young woman was replaced by a portrait of a confused, possibly traumatized adolescent, deeply uncertain about her body, her desires, and her entire romantic future. The media had meticulously documented her transition step by step, yet few had ever publicly dared to ask the fundamental question at each juncture: why? Why was surgery scheduled before adulthood? Why were hormone blockers introduced so early? Why did no one on record question the profound psychological trade-offs? These are not attacks on the validity of trans identity itself. They are powerful critiques of a medical, social, and cultural system that arguably treated Jazz more as an ideological prototype than as a living, breathing, evolving child. As more complex and sometimes regrettable outcomes surfaced from other early transitioners, Jazz's story began to appear not only unique but terrifyingly emblematic. The affirming narrative, it seemed, had made no room for pain, no room for growing pains, no room for saying, "Wait," and that critical omission may have ultimately cost Jazz her profound peace of mind. At the zenith of her public career, Jazz Jennings transcended her name. She became a banner of hope, a radiant, articulate teen who wrote best-selling books, starred in her own reality show, and spoke at major universities. She was, in essence, everything trans advocacy groups could desire: sweet, intelligent, media-trained, and non-threatening, the perfect mascot for progress. But the pedestal is never a safe place for a child to stand. By her early 20s, that meticulously cultivated image began its undeniable unraveling. Slowly, then all at once, Jazz was no longer the unshakable symbol of trans success. She was openly grappling with self-doubt, depression, binge eating, and post-surgical trauma. As she struggled, so too did the movement that had so heavily relied on her story. Activists faced a serious dilemma: how to properly frame Jazz's visible unraveling in a world that thrives on simple, clean narratives. Some advocates chose to double down. They insisted that Jazz's undeniable pain was not a failure of gender transition, but an inevitable consequence of a world still steeped in transphobia. Her difficulties, they argued, only underscored the desperate need for more resources, more support, and greater visibility. Jazz, they maintained, was a pioneer wounded not by her path, but by the relentless cruelty of society. Others took a quieter, more subtle route. Some LGBTQ organizations, which had once eagerly featured Jazz's story in school curricula and brochures, began to quietly distance themselves. She no longer fit the tidy archetype of happy trans teen becomes happy trans adult. Her profound isolation, her tears, her weight gain, these were all inconvenient truths in a culture still aggressively fighting to prove that transition invariably leads to wholeness. And through all this, the political arena watched, poised to strike. Conservative commentators seized upon Jazz's visible pain to argue ferociously against gender-affirming care for minors. Clips from I Am Jazz were deliberately recirculated out of context. Headlines screamed, "Look what they did to her," To them, Jazz was no longer a symbol of hope, but a tragic sign of gross overreach. She became a passive, wounded prop in the relentless culture war debates, her own voice muted as both sides shouted over her image. Jazz herself grew increasingly weary. In private moments, she expressed utter exhaustion, not just from her personal struggles, but from the immense burden of being a political symbol at all. "I just want to be me," she once softly lamented, "not someone people debate about." But after nearly 2 decades in the spotlight, Jazz's identity was no longer truly hers alone. It now belonged to statehouses, classrooms, internet forums, and media panels. She had been assigned a devastating new kind of gender, representative a role no child should ever be forced to shoulder. And now, having endured the procedures, the trauma, the applause, and the intense backlash, the haunting question remains: who is Jazz Jennings when the final cameras finally turn off? For years, the Jennings family was presented to the public as a perfect, united front, staunch, loving allies, navigating a hostile world for the sake of their transgender daughter. Their home appeared to be a space of perfect affirmation: press interviews, TV production meetings, and medical planning. To the outside world, they were the very model of progressive parenting and unconditional love. But the emotional cracks were always present. They simply were not broadcast in the highlight reels. Jeanette Jennings, Jazz's mother, was consistently the family's loudest, most dominant voice. From the very beginning, she acted as the primary gatekeeper, relentlessly coordinating hormone treatments, pushing for complex surgeries, and fiercely defending both her and Jazz's choices to skeptics on national television and online. In every interview, she presented herself as a warrior mother, uncompromising, passionate, and fiercely protective. But as Jazz's emotional and physical struggles intensified, so too did Jeanette's visible frustration. The supportive tone began to visibly fray. In the later seasons of I Am Jazz, viewers saw moments that were jarringly, painfully raw. In one scene, Jeanette sat opposite her daughter, her voice rising, her face flushed with palpable fatigue. "I've been through this with you too long. You're just making excuses." Jazz, blank-eyed and weighed down by sadness, offered no response. This was much more than a simple family argument. It was a symbol of a deeper tension, the invisible, painful line between love and control, between protection and projection. The fundamental dynamic between mother and daughter had irrevocably shifted. Jeanette had carried the banner of trans advocacy for so long, but critics increasingly began to ask, was her urgency about Jazz's well-being or about preserving the triumphant story they had all committed their lives to telling? Even supporters found themselves wrestling with uncomfortable queries. Was Jeanette, in her powerful urge to promote and protect, somehow failing to pause and truly hear her daughter's pain? Had Jazz been swept away in a powerful tide of affirmation so strong that even her own parents could not recognize when she needed to stop and simply breathe? A growing, powerful chorus online accused Jeanette of overreach. Some bluntly called her the stage mom of a movement, a woman so profoundly embedded in the narrative of progress that she could not let go, even as her daughter was quietly, publicly unraveling. Every therapy session, every awkward confession, every emotional meltdown was meticulously packaged and aired on television for mass consumption. Meanwhile, other family members displayed clear signs of exhaustion. Jazz's siblings often expressed concern in hushed tones. Her father, Greg, who had once served as a calming counterweight to Jeanette's intensity, appeared increasingly checked out in later episodes, quietly observing instead of actively intervening. The emotional epicenter of the family had shifted dramatically, and no one seemed to know where they stood anymore. The public had once viewed the Jennings family as a symbol of hope. Now, they looked like what they had truly become: a family painfully caught in the machinery of media, advocacy, and irreversible life decisions. a family struggling desperately to support their daughter while simultaneously grappling with the immense, heavy consequences of transforming her into a national icon. And the most painful, haunting question of all lingered. Had Jazz ever been truly permitted to grow into herself organically? Or had she been tragically fast-tracked because the world so urgently needed a story more than it needed her to be genuinely whole? To categorize Jazz Jennings' story as simply tragic would be a gross oversimplification. It is profoundly more than that. It is a harsh, unflinching reflection of the impossible burden placed on a child not just to survive, but to represent an entire social movement. Jazz was never allowed to be just a person. From the age of 6, she was immediately framed as a hero, a revolutionary, a success story already in the making. She became the very first face of a national conversation on trans youth at a time when society was desperate for a powerful poster child. In numerous ways, she fit the part perfectly. But identity, at its core, is never built for a public audience. By her early 20s, that fundamental truth came crashing down. Despite her consistent insistence that she still identifies as female and remains a supporter of trans youth, Jazz began to speak with painful, unreserved honesty about the hidden, immense cost of her journey. She admitted to feeling sexually disconnected, emotionally lost, and psychologically depleted. She was dealing not just with the aftermath of complex surgeries, but with the profound consequences of never getting the quiet chance to wonder who she might have become without the scripts, the cameras, and the relentless pressure. In one particularly striking scene from her show, she said quietly, "I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore." That single sentence should have stopped the entire nation cold. It was not a statement about being transgender. It was a raw human cry, one that fully exposed the emotional vacuum created when personal identity is intensely shaped under constant, microscopic public scrutiny. Jazz's story reveals that even the most well-intentioned public narratives can easily become unyielding prisons. In our collective rush to celebrate progress, we often dangerously forget the profound complexity of individual human lives. Jazz's tale is not an argument against gender transition. It is a devastating warning against premature certainty, the over-medicalization of childhood, and the weaponization of young lives for ideological or political gain. She was endlessly praised when she smiled, when she said the right things, when she made it all look effortlessly easy. But when she began to backslide, to stutter, to gain weight, to openly admit to confusion, her story suddenly became inconvenient. And yet, that is precisely when she became profoundly real. What Jazz's journey ultimately exposes is a far broader cultural failing, our fundamental discomfort with complexity. We prefer clean, tidy stories. We celebrate definitive before and after transformations. But Jazz is currently stuck in the murky, messy middle, a place where doubt, acceptance, regret, and growth all painfully coexist. She is not merely a symbol. She is a young woman fighting to rebuild herself after a childhood lived under unrelenting, unbearable pressure. A person navigating a complex identity in public, in real time, and in profound pain. And in that painful, difficult authenticity, there is perhaps a new, enduring kind of hope. Not the glossy, perfect kind, but the hope that is born from unvarnished honesty. From saying, "I don't have all the answers," from saying, "I'm still figuring it out." As of 2024, Jazz continues to openly post updates online, speak about her ongoing mental health struggles, and connect with the millions of fans who have followed her since early childhood. She is actively working on rebuilding her confidence, losing weight, and finding greater clarity about her own future. But there is a noticeable quietness now. The relentless political spotlight has moved on. The TV cameras have largely faded away. For perhaps the very first time, Jazz is not a headline, not an ambassador, not a symbol. but simply a young woman trying to figure out what it genuinely means to be herself. And in that quiet, we are left with the haunting central question. What happens when a child tragically becomes a powerful movement before they have ever truly learned how to be a person? Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments section below. Thank you very much for watching. Until our next time.